It's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim wa ad-dallin. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. A'udhu billahi as-sami'il alim min ash-shaytan al-layin ar-rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. ولعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So we have been climbing. You may not have felt it as climbing. It may have felt like maybe stumbling or crawling, or perhaps on the worst afternoons, the ones where the hours before Maghrib stretched like rubber. And the old voice said, go back, it was easier before. It may have felt like falling, but you were climbing, we were climbing. For close to 4 weeks now, 4 Saturday evenings, 4 movements of a single prayer. We've been making our way up a mountain we could not see when we started. In session 1, we left. We heard the call of Ibrahim, peace and blessings be upon him, and we walked out of the familiar rooms. We walked out of the familiar rooms of the ego and into the open air of Ramadan. That was the hijrah, the great migration. The first step, the hardest step. Because leaving is easy to talk about and almost impossible to actually do. And the house of the self has a gravitational pull that most people never escape. In session 2, we cleaned. We scrubbed the mirror of the heart, limb by limb, sense by sense, layer by layer. And we learnt that the heart is not broken, it is covered. And that the work of Ramadan is not to build something new, but to remove what was never supposed to be there in the first place. In session 3, we ate. We sat down at the banquet of God. You are the guests of God. And we discovered that the food on the table was not bread, but rather it was ma'rifah, intimate knowledge that changes the one who receives it. We learnt what it means to be fed by God Himself. In session 4, we sacrificed. We named the greatest idol, not a statue of stone, but the living, breathing structure of habit and comfort and self-worship that we call me. We met the horse that must be trained, not killed. We heard Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, describe the riyada, the breaking in of the soul through taqwa. And we traced the chain of inheritance, fasting to silence, silence to wisdom, wisdom to ma'rifah, and ma'rifah to yaqeen, certainty. At the end of that session, Imam Ali left us with a word. The word was al-ahrar, the free. He said, some worship God out of desire. That is the worship of the merchants. Some worship God out of fear. That is the worship of the slaves. And some worship God out of gratitude. And that is the worship of the free. We said, hold on to that word. We will need it. And tonight, we need it, because tonight is different. We are already inside the last 10 nights of Ramadan, the nights of Qadr, the nights of manifest destiny. The air has changed. Something has thinned. Some membrane between ourselves and our Lord that was thick and opaque a month ago has become, through 4 weeks of hunger and prayer and the slow cracking of the idol, become almost translucent. And 3 days ago, on the 21st of this blessed month, we lost the man who has been our teacher all series. And earlier on, we lost his son, who was also our teacher through all of our sessions. That was, of course, Imam Khamenei. And 3 days ago, I'm talking about Imam Ali, the commander of the faithful, the trainer of the horse, and the breaker of the idol. The man who said, I am training it. was struck down in the mihrab or in the prayer niche on the 19th, and he left us on the 21st. And in our closing dua for session 4, we wept for him and heard him say, with blood on his lips and paradise in his eyes, Fuztu wa Rabbil Kaaba. By the Lord of the Kaaba, we have succeeded, or I have succeeded. His blood is still fresh in our calendar. His teaching is still ringing in our ears. And tonight, on the night he has prepared us for, through 4 sessions of training and breaking and feeding and stripping away, we arrive at the question that has been waiting behind every session. What happens when you actually meet God? There is a passage in Imam Ali's letter to his son, letter 31 in Nahj al-Balagha, written in the aftermath of the Battle of Siffin. Perhaps the most extraordinary document a father has ever left a child, where Imam Ali gives 6 commands for the heart. Not suggestions, not advice, commands. Listen to them and hear the map of everything we have done this month. Revive your heart with counsel, still it with renunciation, fortify it with certainty, illuminate it with wisdom, humble it with the remembrance of death, and bring it to confess its own annihilation. 6 commands, 5 sessions. The correspondence is almost too precise to be a coincidence. Revive your heart with counsel. That was session 1, the wake-up call. The moment the heart stirred and said, I cannot stay in this house any longer. Still it with renunciation, session 2, the stripping away. The cleaning of the mirror until what remains is not the mirror at all, but what it reflects. Fortify it with certainty. Illuminate it with wisdom. Session 3, the banquet. The moment when knowledge ceased to be something you carry and became something you are carried by. Humble it with the remembrance of death. Session 4, the breaking of the idol, the training of the horse. Imam Ali on his deathbed 3 nights ago, blood on his lips, still teaching. And the 6th command, the final word, bring your heart to confess its own annihilation, al-Fana. This is where we're standing tonight. The entire program of Ramadan compressed into 6 commands by the man whose martyrdom we are mourning. And the last word is Fana, annihilation. Not as an end, but as an arrival. Not as something to fear, but as something to confess, to acknowledge, to accept, to welcome. The heart does not resist its own annihilation. It confesses it, the way a river confesses the sea. But what does it mean to confess your own annihilation? What does Fana actually look like? Not as a concept in a book of philosophy, but as something you might taste on a night like tonight, with your forehead on the ground and nothing between you and your Lord but the thinning air of the last 10 nights. This is what we're here to explore this evening. Please give me a salawat and we move to movement 1, the worship of the free, why you came.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
So at the end of session 4, we left you with a word. Do you remember it? Imam Ali said, in saying 237 of Nahj al-Balagha, that there are 3 kinds of worshippers. We just mentioned this earlier in the introduction and recap. Some worship God out of desire. That is the worship of the merchants. Some worship God out of fear. That is the worship of the slaves. And some worship God out of gratitude. That is the worship of the free. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. We then said, hold on to that word, the free, al-ahrar. We need it. We will need it. And tonight, like I've said, we need it. Because there is a question that the word ahrar, or the free, opens up. And it is a question that matters more on the nights of Qadr or destiny than on any other night of the year. If the free do not worship for the sake of paradise, and they do not worship out of fear of hell, then what exactly draws them to the prayer mat at 3 in the morning on a night like this? What force pulls a person to their knees when the transaction has been transcended? When they are not buying paradise and they are not fleeing punishment, what is left? Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, answers this. In the same letter, 31, the same wasiyah, the will to his son, Imam al-Hassan, from which we drew the 6 heart commands a few moments ago, he says, "Do not be the slave of another when God has made you free." Notice the architecture. In session 4, Imam Ali planted the idea of freedom in a saying, a hikmah, a short saying. A seed dropped into the soil at the end of the evening. Now, in his wasiyah to his son, the most intimate document a father can leave, he does not suggest it, he commands it. God made you free, not partially free, not free on the condition that you perform well, not free as long as you maintain the right habit and the right image and the right standing among the people. Free. And the command follows, do not enslave yourself to anything that is less than him. Not to desire, not to fear, not to habit, not to the opinion of others, not to anything that Imam Ali spent all of session 4 teaching us to break. Act like the free person he created you and me to be. But the question still burns. The free person who kneels on the night of Qadr, what draws them? If it's not for desire of reward, nor is it for fear of punishment, then what is the pull? What is the gravity? There is a narration attributed again to Imam Ali that the great scholars have treasured. Mirza Malik Tabrizi cites in his al-Muraqabat, which has formed a bedrock for this entire series, in his discussion of the highest station of worship, Ayatullah Bahjat, may God rest his pure soul, returned to it again and again and again in his teaching circles and Qom. And the quote is, the statement is, from Imam Ali again, the reference of course is in the write-up, I did not worship you, Imam Ali is saying this, I did not worship you from fear of your fire, nor from desire for your paradise, but I found you worthy of worship and therefore I worshipped you. I found you worthy, not I calculated the reward and decided it was sufficient. Not I weighed the punishment and decided the risk was too great. I found you. And what I found was that you deserved to be worshipped. The worship came not from what I might receive, but from what you actually are. Ayatullah Bahjat, a man who spent nearly a century in the proximity of God, who was known among the scholars of Qom for a spiritual depth that most of them could sense but few could name, taught this narration to his students and then said something quite remarkable. He began by noting that the Imams themselves were not exempt from the human experience of hope and fear. They too felt the pull of paradise and the weight of hell's warning. But they did not worship for those reasons. And then Ayatollah Bahjat said, the pure Imams, peace and blessings be upon them, felt both fear of hell and desire for paradise. But they did not worship for the sake of fear or desire. For the phrase, I found you worthy of worship and so I worshipped you, offers no explanation for why we worship. Rather, it is the story of the moth and the flame. The reference is in the write-up. The moth and the flame. Think about that. The moth does not fly towards the fire because it has calculated the thermal benefits. It does not approach because it fears the darkness behind it. It flies towards the flame because the flame is the flame, because the light calls to the one who was made for light, and there is no argument that can explain the pull to someone who has not felt it, and no argument that is needed for someone who has. And then Ayatullah Bahjat unpacked the phrase, Ahlan li ibadah, worthy of worship, and drew it from three stations. He said, it means worthy of being sought and desired and worshipped. I found you worthy of worship means worthy of being the one who is longed for, who is wanted, and who is adored. Three movements in one word. The seeker who searches, the lover who longs, the worshipper who bows. All three drawn by the same gravity. All three answering the same call. All three saying, in different ways, the same thing the moth says when it turns towards the light. I did not choose this. This chose me. That is why tonight matters. Laylatul Qadr, the night of Qadr, or the night of destiny, is not a transaction. Worship tonight and receive 1,000 months worth of credit to your account. That would be the worship of the merchants. And we left the merchants behind in session 4. The night of Qadr is the night when the veil between the servant and the Lord is thinnest. The night when the reason for worship, not the reward of worship, but the reason, the pull, the gravity becomes visible. Not as an argument, but as a presence. The free do not worship harder on the night of Qadr because the reward is multiplied. They worship on this night because the beloved is nearer. And the moth cannot help but fly. But how near? And what happens to the one who draws close? Please give me a salawat and we move to movement 2, Fana, the annihilation that is arrival.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Listen again to Imam Ali, the same letter, the same wasiyah, the same will, a few lines further, and hear the sentence that splits our series in two. He says, know, my son, that you were created for the hereafter, not for this world, for annihilation, not for permanence, for death, not for life. للفناء لا للبقاء, for annihilation, not for permanence. Imam Ali, the man whose martyrdom we marked 3 nights ago, uses the exact words of our final 2 sessions. Tonight, session 5 is Fana. Next week on Eid, God willing, is Baqa, what remains. Imam Ali wrote the outline of our series 14 centuries before we sat down to plan it. But listen carefully to what he is saying, because it is easy to hear this and recoil. Created for annihilation. One might say that sounds like nihilism. That sounds like despair. It sounds like the universe is a fire that consumes everything and leaves nothing. But in reality, it is the opposite. What Imam Ali means is this: you were not created to persist as you are. You were not created to grip tightly to the small, defended, frightened self that wants to be the center of everything. You were created to lose yourself in something so vast that the word yourself ceases to have the same meaning. The drop was created for the ocean. Does the drop die when it enters the ocean? In one sense, maybe it does, yes. It is no longer a separate drop. But in another sense, it has become something immeasurably greater than it was. It has become the ocean. The moth was created for the flame, and yes, Ayatullah Bahjat used that image in movement 1 that we discussed a moment ago. And here it returns, because Fana is the completion of what the moth began, when it first felt the pull of light. And here is the callback to session 2, the mirror. Do you remember? We said the heart is not broken, it is covered. We spent that entire session cleaning, scrubbing away the rust and the grime until the glass was clear. Now ask, What happens to a perfectly clean mirror? It does not disappear. It disappears into what it reflects. You stop seeing the glass altogether. All you see is the face. That is Fana. Not the annihilation of the self, but the annihilation of the self's claim to be the center of the story. The ego does not vanish. It becomes transparent. The mirror does not break. It becomes invisible because it is doing at last exactly what it was designed and made to do. There is a hadith Qudsi, a hadith attributed to God, that has been with us since the beginning of this series, a thread running through every session, cited by Ayatullah Imam Ali, may God protect him, in Hikmat Ibadat, the wisdom of worship, and by Mirza Malik Tabrizi in al-Muraqabat. You should know it by now. God is speaking in his own voice, and he says, fasting is for me, and I myself am its reward. The reference, of course, is in the write-up. We have heard it before. But tonight, on the nights of Qadr, after weeks of hunger and prayer and the slow cracking of the idol, we are ready to hear something in it that we were not ready for at the start of the month. Ayatullah Bahjat returned to this hadith often in his teachings on the month of Ramadan. And what he drew from it was not a repetition of what the other scholars had said. It was a sharpening, a blade pressed against the comfortable reading we may have settled into. He said, in the Hadith Qudsi it is stated, fasting is for me and I myself am its reward. That is, God the Most High gives its reward without intermediary, over and above the rewards mentioned in Scripture and Sunnah. As the Quran says, no soul knows what delights of the eye are hidden for them, meaning it is beyond description. Without intermediary, bidune vasite, not through a book of accounts, not through an angel tallying our deeds. God himself directly, without anything between you and him. In earlier sessions, we heard this hadith as a statement about the uniqueness of fasting, that it belongs to God in a way that other acts of worship do not. That reading was true. But Ayatullah Bahjat presses further. He says the reward is not merely unique, rather it is indescribable. It exceeds what the scripture itself has named. It exceeds what the Sunnah has catalogued. It belongs to a category that the Quran can only gesture toward. No soul knows. This is what weeks of emptying has been preparing us to hear. Every day of the month of Ramadan, we have been practicing negation. We have been saying no food, no water, no to the body's most basic demands. And in that repeated no, a space opened, a space where the self used to stand, where the appetites used to sit, where the ego used to hold court. That space is not empty, it is available. And what fills it, according to God's own testimony, is God himself. There is another hadith that Ayatullah Bahjat taught alongside this one, the hadith of the faster's two joys. It reads like this: the fasting person has two joys, one at the breaking of the fast and one at the meeting with his Lord. The reference again is in the write-up. Two joys. The first is the body's joy, the relief of iftar, the date on the tongue, the water on the dry throat. Every one of us knows this joy. We might extend it for someone like me, the cigarette after the fast, after iftar. We have tasted it every evening for 24 days. But the second joy is the soul's joy. And notice the hadith does not say joy at receiving reward from his Lord. It does not say joy at entering paradise. It says liqa, meeting. The joy of the faster is not what God gives. It is God himself, encountered, met, present. And Ayatullah Bahjat, with his characteristic sharpness, added a condition. He says, the faster has two joys, one at iftar and one at the meeting with his Lord. But this is only so if at iftar and suhoor he does not compensate for what he did not eat during the day. He does not compensate for what he did not eat during the day. Think about this. The fasting person who gorges at sunset has traded the second joy for a larger version of the first. The real faster carries the emptiness forward. The emptiness is not a problem to be solved at iftar. It is not a deprivation to be corrected at suhoor. It is the doorway to liqa. For 24 days, we have been emptying. Tonight is not the night to ask whether the emptying was worth it. Tonight is the night to discover what the emptying was for. In Al-Muraqabat, Mirza Malik Tabrizi asks us to imagine what the month of Ramadan actually is. He says, picture the month as a noble envoy. Rasulun Azizun Sharif, arriving at your door from a great king. The envoy tells you that the sultan or the king has invited you to his banquet. And not just any banquet, a banquet where the sultan or the king himself will be present, where he promises forgiveness of every fault, gifts beyond reckoning, robes of honor, and beyond all of this, something that defies description. Malik Tabrizi writes in Al-Muraqabat, it is best for him to imagine this month as through a noble, honored envoy from one of the kings of the world has come to him, and has come on behalf of that king to invite these subjects to the king's banquet, and has informed him that the sultan, the king, will treat him with the utmost of grace, forgiveness of all faults, bestowal of gifts, warrants of authority, and splendid robes of honor. Nay, rather in the station of pleasure, in the gathering of intimacy and meeting, nearness and fidelity, and his being honored among the company of the beloved ones and the saints. Intimacy, meeting, nearness, the company of the beloved. This is what the month of Ramadan has been. For a month, we have been sitting at the banquet. God spread the table. You have been invited to the feast of God. The Prophet said in his famous sermon at the gates of the month, and you have been made among the people of God's honor. In the khutbah of Sha'baniyah, Prophet Muhammad said, O people, the month of God has come to you bearing blessing and mercy and forgiveness, a month in which you have been invited to the feast of God, and you have been made therein among the people of God's honor. You have eaten the king's food. You have worn the king's garments. You have slept under the king's roof. Every prayer was his gift. Every moment of tawfiq, every time you managed to rise for suhoor, every time you held your tongue, every time the horse obeyed its reins, that was his enabling, not your achievement. And now, as the month draws to its close on the nights of Qadr, the question hangs in the air. What exactly have you brought to this banquet that was yours? Mirza Malik Tabrizi tells us how the honest servant responds, not with a list of accomplishments, but with 4 things. By showing gratitude, accepting the grace, offering the excuse of one's deficiency, and the abasement of confession. The abasement of confession. Not, here's what I have achieved this month. Not, here is my record of devotion. The honest servant arrives at the end of the feast and says, everything was yours. The food was yours. The strength to fast was yours. Even the tears in my dua were a gift I did nothing to earn. I am bankrupt, and I confess it. And here is the secret that the tradition has been whispering to us all month long, that we first heard in session 4, and that now on the nights of Qadr becomes deafening in its clarity. The bankruptcy is the qualification. Listen again to the dua we encountered 2 weeks ago, the dua for the nights of Ramadan from Misbah al-Mutahajjid and from Iqbal al-Amal. It's one of the du'as for the nights of Ramadan. It reads, I have not come trusting in any righteous deed I have done, nor seeking the patronage of any creature I have hoped in. I have come confessing against my own soul, my wrongdoing and my oppression. References are in the write-up. In session 4, we heard this dua as the sound of an idol breaking, the idol of self-satisfaction, the idol of I have done enough. Tonight, on the threshold of Qadr, we hear it differently. We hear it as the entrance requirement. We do not arrive at the meeting with a CV of good deeds. We do not present credentials at the door. We arrive as the bankrupt servant, with nothing in our hands but the admission that everything in our hands was his. The Dhul I'tiraf, this term that Maliki Tabrizi named, the abasement of confession, is not a failure. It is the posture in which the meeting becomes possible. And the extraordinary, impossible, world-inverting truth of Qadr is this. That admission, that bankruptcy, is exactly what God has been waiting for. The fast is for me, he said, not for your resume, for me. And the reward is not what I give you. The reward is that I am here. Ayatullah Bahjat, and we must speak of him here, because he spent decades living in the proximity of these nights in a way that few in our age have matched. Taught something about Laylatul Qadr, the night of Qadr, that cuts through a great deal of our confusion. There is a report attested in the biographical literature that Imam al-Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return, said to someone who had long sought to meet him. Imam Mahdi said, fix yourself and we will come to you. And Ayatullah Bahjat added to this, the abandonment of obligations and the commission of prohibited acts, these are the veil and the mask that prevent our seeing of that noble presence. The veil is not distance. God is not far. The Imam is not absent, as we've said in the Mahdawiyya sessions. The Imam is anonymous. He is far from absent. What prevents the encounter is nothing more exotic than our own abandoned obligations and committed prohibitions. The veil is ours. This is the teaching about Qadr that changes everything. You do not find God by searching. You find God by becoming findable. Laylatul Qadr is not a treasure hunt where the treasure is hidden in one of the 3 nights, and your job is to guess which one. It is the night, or rather the state, in which the one you have been seeking turns and says, I was here the whole time. You were the one who was absent. If you have done the work of weeks, if you have left the house, cleaned the mirror, eaten at the banquet, and broken the idol, then tonight, right now, you have become findable. The question is not whether God will show up. He's already here. The question is whether you will be present enough to notice. And notice what the Quran tells us happens on this night. The spirit, ar-ruh, descends. Not just the angels, but the spirit, which the Quran specifically names separately, which is greater than the angels, which descends once a year upon the hearts of the Imam, may our souls be his ransom. Ayatullah Bahjat taught about the nature of this descent, saying, and the spirit itself is of 2 kinds. One is the spirit that descends once a year on the night of Qadr upon the heart of the Imam, may our souls be his ransom, together with the angels. The angels and the spirit descend therein. The angels and the spirit come down, and the spirit is other than the angels. The spirit is other than the angels. The reference is in the write-up, of course. The Quran itself makes this distinction. تَنَزَّلُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ وَالرُّوحُ, naming the angels and then naming the spirit, the ruh, separately, as though to say, this is something more, something the angels themselves attend upon, something that descends upon the qalb, the heart of the living Imam, carrying with it the decrees of every soul for the coming year. The tradition teaches us, and Mafatih al-Janan records it in its commentary on the nights of Qadr, that on this night, the decrees of the year's affairs take form on this night, and the angels and the spirit descend to the presence of the Imam of the age, may our souls be his ransom, and they present to him what has been decreed for each individual. The references in the write-up. The decrees of your life are being written in these nights. And they are being written not by a distant bureaucracy, but in the presence of the one who carries the light of God on earth, the one whom Ayatullah Bahjat devoted his life's longing. And yet, and this is the part that keeps the tradition honest, that prevents Qadr from becoming spiritual theatre. Ayatullah Bahjat also said, this is very important, it is not necessary for a person to seek a miraculous visitation with the Master of the Age. Rather, perhaps performing 2 rak'ah, 2 units of prayer, and then making tawassul to the Imams is better than such a visitation. For wherever they may be, that noble presence sees and hears, and the visitation of any of the poor Imams is equivalent to the visitation of the Hujjah himself. The meeting is not spectacle. It is not about seeing visions or hearing voices. 2 rak'ah, 2 units, offered with the heart that Imam Ali described, the heart that has been revived, stilled, fortified, illuminated, humbled, and brought to confess its own annihilation. Those 2 units or rak'ah may be worth more than any extraordinary experience, because the meeting is not an event. It is a relationship, and a relationship is built in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the 2 rak'ah before dawn when no one is watching and the moth has nothing left to give except its flight toward the flame. Please give me a salawat and we move to the quieter moment, the man who lived it.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So we've been speaking of Fana as a concept, a theological category, a station on the path. But on the 21st of Ramadan, we mark the death, the martyrdom of the man who did not merely teach Fana, he lived it. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, may God rest his pure soul, was struck on the 19th. He died on the 21st. Between the blow and the death, in those final hours when the poison of the sword moved through his body, he dictated his last testament to his scribe, Ubaidullah ibn Abi Rafi. He addressed it to Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein and to all of his children, and through them to every believer who would ever read it. And the testament begins with the most extraordinary opening line a dying man has ever spoken. It starts with, "This is the testament of the servant of God, the commander of the faithful Ali ibn Abi Talib, in the last of his days in this world, as he is passing to the isthmus of the dead and departing from family and companions." He is passing to the isthmus of the dead, to the area of the dead. He states it as a fact, not with dread, not with resistance, but with the calm of a man who told his son in that same letter 31 that we've been reading throughout the series, you were created for annihilation, not for permanence. And then, and this is the part that breaks you open if you're paying attention, he does not spend his last breath talking about himself. He does not talk about his pain and his discomfort. He does not talk about his legacy. He does not talk about the injustice of the blow. He turns his face, the face of a dying man, towards other people, and he begins a litany. He says, God, O God, in the matter of the orphans, do not let them go hungry, and do not let them be lost while you are present. God, O God, in the matter of your neighbors, they are the legacy your prophet entrusted to you. He kept urging their care until we thought he would make them your heirs. God, O God, in the matter of the Quran, the book of your Lord, do not let anyone surpass you in acting upon it. God, O God, in the matter of prayer, it is the best of deeds. It is the pillar of your religion. Do not neglect it. God, O God, in the matter of fasting and the month of Ramadan, it is a shield from the fire for you. God, O God, in the matter of the poor and the destitute, make them partners in your livelihoods. And God, O God, in the struggles against your own selves, they are the most hostile of enemies to you. God, O God, God, O God, God, O God, 12 times. The orphans, the neighbors, the Quran, the prayer, the zakat, the charity, the wayfarer, the poor, the guest, the month of Ramadan, the pilgrimage, the jihad against others' oppression, the jihad against the self, and then his very last words, prayer, 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 and do not let the blame of any blamer hold you back in the path of God. And do not abandon the commanding of good and the forbidding of evil, lest God send the worst of you over you, and then you call upon him and he does not answer you against them. The reference, of course, is in the write-up. This is what Fana looks like when it is real. It does not look like withdrawal. It does not look like a man floating above the world, untouched by its suffering. It looks like a dying man whose very last breath is spent on other people. The orphans, the neighbors, the poor, the wayfarer. The self has been annihilated, not into emptiness, but into compassion. The mirror has become so clean that all it reflects is the face of God. And the face of God, it turns out, is turned towards the orphan, the neighbor, the stranger, the one who has no voice. This is the Fana that we have been building toward all month. Not the Fana that escapes the world, the Fana that returns to it, emptied of self, filled with God, and therefore incapable of passing by a single suffering person without stopping. Imam Ali did not escape. Imam Ali did not float. Imam Ali bled, and with his last breath, he said, the orphans. And in our time, our Imam Ali, Imam Khamenei, did the same. With his last breath, he would have been thinking about the people. In fact, he did when he was told that we can take you to safety. He said, can you take these 90 million to safety? If not, I'm here. If our fasting has not made us more like that, more attentive to the orphan, more tender toward the neighbor, more incapable of walking past an injustice, then we have not yet understood what the emptying was for. And if it has, even a little, even imperfectly, then tonight, on the night of Qadr, on the night of decree, we are closer to understanding what it means to be created for Fana. Not created for disappearance, created for the kind of love that forgets itself entirely, because it has found something worth forgetting itself for. And now we move on to the last Friday, the day of Quds. We've just heard Imam Ali spend his dying breath on the orphans and the neighbors and the poor. We've heard his final warning: do not abandon the commanding of good and the forbidding of evil. And now I must name something that falls in these very days. In fact, it fell yesterday. Something that the tradition has placed inside the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan, not by accident, but rather by design. The last Friday of this blessed month is known as Yawm al-Quds al-Alami, the International Day of Quds. It was established in 1979 by Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, who called on all the Muslims of the world to designate the last Friday of Ramadan as a day of solidarity. And notice his words very carefully. He said, I ask all of the Muslims of the world and the Muslim governments to join together to sever the hand of this usurper and its supporters. The reference is in the write-up. He placed it in the month of Ramadan deliberately, inside the nights of Qadr, inside the very days when the decree of the coming year are being written. Because the fate of the oppressed is not a political footnote to the spiritual program. It is the spiritual program. The month that trains you to hunger is the same month that commands you to remember those who hunger without choice. The night that brings you to your knees before God are the same nights that should bring you to your feet for justice. And while the day of Quds was born from the specific suffering of the Palestinian people, and Palestine remains its primary and most urgent subject, a wound that has only deepened in the decades since Imam Khomeini spoke those words, the day was never meant to be limited to one geography or one people. Imam Khomeini himself said it plainly. He said, Quds Day is not only the day of Palestine, rather it is the day of Islam. And the great Ayatullah Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Fadlullah, may God rest his pure soul, expanded the frame even further. He said, we must not consider the Universal Day of Quds as a day for a specific sect or a specific region. It is a day for Islam in its entirety, and a day for the oppressed human being in the face of the arrogant powers. It is a cry in the face of the usurpers that rights do not die with the passage of time. The oppressed human being, not the oppressed Muslim, not the oppressed Arab, the oppressed human being in the face of the arrogant. This is the frame. The mustakbirin, the arrogant powers, and the mustadafin, and the mufsidin, the corruptors. Those who oppress without regard for the creed or color of those they crush. We see them. One of them is orange. The other one might be dead. And the believer who is being dyed in the month of Ramadan stands against that oppression without regard for the creed or color of those who suffer it. They could be Palestinian, Yemeni, Congolese, Rohingya, Sudanese, British, American, European, etc. Anyone. Wherever a human being is displaced, besieged, starved, or stripped of dignity by the machinery of arrogance, the believer's solidarity is not optional. It is worship. And here is the point that prevents the day of Quds from becoming a single square on the calendar, a day that you observe and then set aside. There is a saying that runs through the veins of this tradition like a second bloodstream. And it's a saying we all know very well. Every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. Ashura is not one day. It is a permanent orientation. It is the commitment to stand with Imam Hussein against the Yazid in every age, in every form, wherever the confrontation between truth and tyranny may appear. And the day of Quds operates on this exact same logic. It is not one Friday. It is the annual sharpening of a blade that must remain sharp every day of the year. The last Friday of Ramadan brings the subject to the fore, the same way as Ashura does, the same way as Arba'in does. But the true believer does not put the oppressed down when that day ends. The true believer carries them in dua, in action, in refusal to look away, in the commanding of good and the forbidding of evil, that Imam Ali made his very last words to us on this earth. We heard those words moments ago. He said, "And do not abandon the commanding of good and the forbidding of evil, lest God set the worst of you over you, and then you call upon him and he does not answer you against them." The day of Quds is the tradition's way of ensuring that those words do not remain beautiful yet inert. It is the institutional form of Imam Ali's dying command. It is the moment each year when the entire Ummah is asked to look up from its private worship and say, "We see you, we have not forgotten, and we will not be silent." If our Ramadan has meant anything, if the fasting and the prayer and the breaking of the idol have done their work, then the day of Quds is not an interruption of the spiritual program. It is its proof. Please give me a very loud salawat and we move on to movement 3, the night the angels descend.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل
عجل فرجه.
So we've spoken enough. Let us sit now with the surah, Surah al-Qadr. In the name of God, the All-Merciful, the All-Compassionate. Indeed, we sent it down on the night of Qadr or decree. And what will make you know what the night of Qadr is, the night of decree is? The night of decree is better than 1,000 months. The angels and the Spirit descend therein by the permission of their Lord, with every decree. Peace it is until the rising of the dawn. And of course, this is Surah al-Qadr, the chapter of destiny, the 97th chapter of the Quran, verses 1 to 5. 5 verses. 5 verses. And in those 5 verses, everything we have been building toward all month. Notice first what the Quran does not say. It does not say, on this night strive harder, pray more, push yourself beyond your limit. It says, they descend. The angels come down. The Spirit comes down. The decrees come down. This night is not about you going up. It is about everything coming to where you already are. You are exhausted. You've been fasting for 24 days. You have wept in dua and fought with your nafs yourself and stumbled and risen and stumbled again. And God does not say to you tonight, climb higher. He says, stay where you are. I'm sending everything down to you. The angels with every decree, with the script of your coming year, with the ink still wet on the pages of your life, they descend to the ground where you are kneeling. They come to you. And the last verse, the seal of the surah, of the chapter, the verse that covers the night like a blanket, Salamun hiya hatta matla'il fajr. Peace it is until the breaking of the dawn. Not peace in the night. The night is peace until the rising of the dawn. From now until the first light, everything is salam, is peace. The war is over. The struggle is paused. The nafs is quiet. The horse is still. The idol is broken. The mirror is clean. The moth has reached the flame. And all that remains is peace. So now we have a contemplative exercise, the 6 commands revisited. I'd like to invite everyone, myself included, into a moment of stillness. If you can, close your eyes. If you cannot, soften your gaze, breathe. We've walked through 5 sessions together. Each one was built on a command that Imam Ali gave his son, a command for the heart. Let us walk through them one final time, slowly, not as a lesson to remember, but as stations to revisit. The first command, revive your heart with counsel. That was session 1, the Great Migration. You heard the call and you left the house of the ego, left the familiar, stepped onto the road. Breathe. Remember the moment this month when something in you first woke up. remember the moment in this month when something in you first woke up. A dua that landed differently. A verse that opened. A silence that felt like an invitation. That the heart was being revived. The second command, still your heart with renunciation. That was session 2. The mirror. You scrubbed and you cleaned. We turned away from things that clouded the glass, the noise, the distractions, the attachments that made the mirror opaque. Breathe. Remember the moment this month when you let something go, a grudge, a bad habit, an opinion about yourself that you had been carrying for years, that was the heart being stilled. The third command, fortify your heart with certainty, illuminate it with wisdom. This was session 3, the banquet. You sat at the table and ate, not food, but knowledge, the names of God, the teachings of the Imams, the du'as that arrived like letters from a friend you had not yet met. Breathe. Remember the moment this month when something became clear. When a truth you had heard 100 times suddenly landed in your chest instead of your head. That was the heart being illumined. The fourth command, humble your heart with the remembrance of death. This was session 4, breaking the idol. The horse was trained, the ego was unseated. You stood before God, we stood before God without the armor of self-satisfaction and said, I have not come trusting in any righteous deed I have done. Breathe. Remember the moment this month when your pretense cracked, when the mask slipped and you saw yourself as you actually are, not as you perform yourself to be. That was the heart being humbled. The fifth command, tonight's command, confess its own annihilation. This is now. This is where we are now. We are here now. We have arrived. Not as the person you were a month ago. Not as the person we pretend to be. Not as the CV of good deeds we wish we could present. Rather, we are here as the bankrupt servant, the one who has nothing in his hands except the confession that everything in his hands was his. And that is enough. That was always enough. Breathe. Now open your eyes. We began this session with Imam Ali's letter 31. We end where we begin. The same line, the same breath. Know, my son, that you were created for the hereafter, not for this world. For annihilation, not for permanence. For death, not for life. Tonight, we have sat with Fana. We have watched the moth reach the flame. We have heard the Hadith Qudsi tell us that the reward of fasting is God Himself. We have stood with the bankrupt servant who arrives with nothing and discovers that nothing was the entrance fee. We have listened to the dying man spend his last breath on the orphans and the neighbors and the poor. And we have confessed our own annihilation. But notice, Imam Ali said 2 words, not one. Lil Fana, la lil baqa. For annihilation, not for permanence. And yet Imam Ali lived. He governed. He loved. He judged. He fought. He wept. He served. He bled. He raised children. He wrote letters. He did not float above the world in a state of mystical disillusion. He lived in it more fully and more fiercely than anyone alive. Because Fana is not the end of the story. It is the hinge. Something remains after the annihilation. Something survives the fire. And what survives is not the old self, patched up and returned. It is something new. Something that has been through the flame and come out the other side as pure light. There is a word for this in the Quran, a word that belongs to our next and final session. Sibghat Allah, the color of God. The dye that does not wash out. We will ask on Eid, God willing, in our final session of this series, did the dye hold? And what does a life look like when it does? But that is for Eid. Tonight is not for questions. Tonight is for arrival. And so I want to close with the words of the man who has been with us all evening. The man who taught us about Fana and then lived it and then died it. Not from his letter to his son this time, not from his deathbed, from his prayer. This is the Munajat, the whispered prayer of Imam Ali. His intimate conversation with God that he gave to Malik al-Ashtar and to other companions, recited at the very mihrab, the very prayer niche, where on the 19th of Ramadan, he was struck. Listen to what the man who said you were created for annihilation says when he turns to face the one he's annihilated before. O he who made manifest what is beautiful and concealed what is ugly. O he who did not reproach for disobedience and did not tear away the veil of the inner secrets. O he of great pardoning, O he of goodly overlooking, O he of vast forgiveness, O he whose both hands are extended in mercy. O master of every secret whisper, of every secret whispered, O ultimate end of every complaint. And then the passage that could have been written for tonight, for this session, for everything we have been trying to say. My master, O my master, you are the bestower and I am the beggar, and who has mercy upon the beggar, save the bestower. My master, O my master, you are the living and I am the dead, and who has mercy upon the dead, save the living. My master, O my master, you are the everlasting and I am the perishing, and who has mercy upon the perishing, save the everlasting. My master, O my master, you are the eternal, and I am the temporary, and who has mercy upon the temporary, save the eternal. أنت الباقي وأنا الفاني. There it is. The whole session in one line. You are the everlasting, and I am the temporary, the perishing. And who has mercy upon the perishing, save the everlasting. This is Fana as prayer, not as concept, not as theology, as the most intimate thing a human being can say to God. I am nothing, you are everything, and I am not afraid, because who else would have mercy on nothingness if not you? And so on this night, as the angels descend, as the decrees are written, as the salam settles over everything until dawn, let us close with the words of Ziyarat Aminallah. This is how the tradition teaches us to address the man who taught us all of this. And buried inside the ziyarah, as though it were placed there for tonight, is a single phrase that carries everything. It says, O God, make my soul tranquil before your decree, content with your judgment, devoted to your remembrance and your supplication, loving towards the chosen ones among your friends, beloved in your earth and your heaven, patient in the face of your trials, grateful for the abundance of your blessings, ever mindful of your bestowals, and longing for the joy of meeting you. Mushtaqan ila farhati liqa'ik. Longing for the joy of meeting you. This is the last word of this session. Not fana, not theology, not even qadr. Longing. Ishtiyaq. The longing of the servant who has been emptied and cleaned and fed and broken and rebuilt, and who now on this night, with nothing left between himself and God, discovers that the only thing remaining in their heart is a single, overwhelming, uncontainable ache. I want to meet you. I have always wanted to meet you. Everything else was just the road to this. Salamun hiya hatta matla'il fajr. Peace it is until the rising of the dawn. Go to your prayers, go to your Quran, go to the ground, the same ground the angels are descending to right now, and place your forehead upon it and let the meeting happen. God willing, we will meet again on Eid. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad and hasten their relief. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.